Since the launch of Classic in 2019, we've already had loads of changes to the way raiding works. By this I mean raid sizes, lockouts, hard modes, heroics, all that sort of thing. And it changes again. Cataclysm really introduced 10-man raiding as a primary way to play the game. At the time of recording, in Wrath of the Lich King, 25-man and 10-man both exist, but you've really got to be doing 25-man because the loot tables are completely different between the two. So if you want to get full bis, you need to do 25-man. In some cases, you need to do 10-man as well, because some of your bis may even come from 10-man. Well, come Cataclysm, 10-man is actually an option as a primary way of raiding. You never need to step foot into a 25-man raid to be able to get full best in slot. That's because 10-man normal drops the same as 25 normal, and 10 heroic drops the same as 25 heroic. They both drop exactly the same items, but obviously if you do 25-man, you're going to get more loot to actually drop from those bosses, which does mean some of those harder to obtain items are potentially easier, but then you do have a lot more competition as well. I would say I've always preferred 10-man raiding over 25-man, but when the loot in 25-man's so good, you've not really got an option. If you want to get the best you can out of your character, you just have to do it. In Cataclysm, it does bring some problems though. 10-man heroic is arguably harder than 25 heroic, and this is because you have to pick very specific comps to cover as many buffs and debuffs as you can. You're limited on combat reses, and everything's less forgiving. On 25-man, you could lose a couple of people right at the start of a fight and still comfortably kill the boss. If you lose a couple of people on 10-man, you've just lost 20% of your raid team. It also means you've got less raid cooldowns that you can use, less big healing cooldowns, and overall, 10-man is definitely slightly more challenging. Maybe not from boss mechanic perspectives, but it's just far less forgiving. So what you actually clicked on the video for is how do the raid lockouts actually work. So in Cataclysm, you can only kill each boss once. That doesn't matter whether it's on 10-man or 25-man. So if you was just raiding normal, you could go into a 25-man raid and let's say clear the first 3 bosses in a raid on 25-man, then you could split up into 2 10-man groups to finish it off. This also does mean if you was doing a 10-man or a 25, it's kind of irrelevant which one, you can switch the difficulty from normal to heroic on a boss-by-boss basis. So you can choose any boss you want each week to progress on heroic. It doesn't need to be the first boss. You could literally go straight to the last. There is exceptions where there's extra bosses where you need to kill the others on heroic to be able to access them, but for the most part, you can comfortably go from normal to heroic on a boss-by-boss basis. This does also mean if you joined a raid and you only managed to get a couple of bosses down on normal, you can join anybody else's raid that is further than that point or at that point and continue to kill the bosses. This does only apply to normal though, because with heroic it has a separate ID that you will be locked to. So for example, if you went into Bastion of Twilight and you killed Heroic Halfus, which is the first boss, you are now locked to that ID. So if you want to clear the rest of it on normal, you would have to form the group. If you found a group that was on the next boss, which was Twin Dragons, you wouldn't be able to join that group because you'll already have an ID, which is your Heroic ID that you're locked to. So basically, for normal bosses, you can feel free to jump between any raids and any groups that you want, as long as they're further than you are on your lockout, and the size doesn't matter. That's what she said. You could go from doing a few bosses in 10-man to then joining another group and doing the last few bosses on 25-man. But if you've killed any heroic bosses at all, you are locked to that one single ID. I do see 10-man raiding being very popular. In fact, I read an article recently from back in 2011 where they was assessing logs and looking at what was the real top DPS, what was the most efficient healer. And it was quite interesting that 80% of all logs created during Dragon Soul were 10-man guilds. I should say 10-man runs, not necessarily guilds, but there was 80% of all of the logs, all of the raids that had been logged were 10-man. Only 20% of them was 25-man. It'll be interesting to see if it goes in the same direction in Cataclysm Classic. At the moment, passing in 10-man is kind of a meme. I don't mean that negatively if you're like sat really proud with full 100s or full 99s in 10-man, because obviously I look at my own passes in 10-man, but people mostly only care about 25-man. But could that change in Cataclysm? On the basis 10-man is more difficult, will 10-man logs be looked at in a much more appreciative light than actually in 25? I look forward to seeing how this unfolds, but just a recap. In normal raids, you can join any other normal raid that's progressed as far as you have in that current lockout. You can only kill each boss of the tier once, so either on 10 or 25, and as soon as you do heroic, you are locked to that ID. You can feel free during your ID to switch between heroic and normal bosses on a boss-by-boss basis. I feel like you're armed enough now to know how the lockouts work, but what about the raid tiers? So tier 11 brings Bastion of Twilight, Blackwing Descent, and Throne of the Four Winds. When you do normal, they're going to drop 359 item level. 359 item level is also what you can use your valor points on, which you'll get from your daily heroic as an example, or from general raiding. The non-heroic tier set is also 359, and it's the same sort of item level that you'll get from things like getting exalted with each reputation. In tier 11, when you go up to doing heroic raiding, you're going to get 372 item level. It's quite a big step up from 359 to 372, but also going from normal raiding to heroic raiding is also a very big step up. The tier tokens that you get in heroic will be heroic tier tokens that give you a reward of 372 item level tier, but much like tier 10 in ICC, you do need to get the base tier first and upgrade it from that. So you can't just go into heroic and start getting tokens and getting 372 gear. You need to get the 359 tier first and then get the token to hand in with it to upgrade it to 372. The nice thing about 372 gear is when you go into Firelands, which is tier 12, the normal raid gear from Firelands is only 378, so the gear stays extremely relevant. Of course, heroic Firelands gear is a big step up even from that, going up to 391, but it's nice that you can get full heroic bis in tier 11 and actually get lots and lots of upgrades, even just from normal Firelands when you go in and start learning the tactics or whatever you're doing before you actually then start progressing on heroic. So the gaps between the normal and heroic gear in each tier are quite large, but the gaps between heroic and normal of the following tier are actually small enough that all of your gear is not made like irrelevant straight away as soon as that tier launches, because there'll be some 372 pieces like if you've got 4 set 372 for example, there'll be 378 bits that drop that you won't even want to use until you can start getting heroic bits to upgrade those from the next tier. Dragon Soul would be very, very far away to even worry about too much, but the same does apply, where you're going from 391 from Heroic Firelands into Dragon Soul Normal, which is 397. So again, only a 6 item level increase to then 410 for heroic items. There are things like weapons from Ragnaros in tier 12 that are slightly higher, being 384 for normal or 397 for heroic, and the same applies for Dragon Soul when you actually do Madness of Deathwing, and the heroic weapons are 416. But there's no huge jumps from tier to tier, like when you think about going from Nax, where you was getting 226 gear from KT, to then hard mode Alduar gear where you're getting 252. We know that that was massively inflated for Blizzard's logic, I don't know, reasoning, whatever you want to say it. Unnecessary is what I call it. But in Cataclysm, it's just a lot smoother item level progression, even though everything is massively inflated, because you know as well as I do that the stats do get very bloated in cata, but it all does stay kind of relevant. And that's it. Hopefully you now understand how the raid lockouts work, how the item levels progress through the tiers. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.